Hello, welcome to the Elevate DataViz show, number 28. Hello, everyone.
There we go. I
There
found
we
it.
are.
I lost the button.
Hello.
Professional
Hello,
grade
welcome.
entertainment here for you all.
Amateur hour over here. All right, we are here finally to explore current topics in DataViz, share our creative inspiration and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. And today we are discussing the field of data visualization. Specifically, is innovation dead in DataViz? What is happening to the future of our field? So I'm going to toss it over to our lovely Will Chase, who is going to talk to us a little bit about where this topic came from. But first, I am Allie Torben. We also have Duncan Gear and Will Chase. And before we jump in, this show is supported by members of the Elevate DataViz learning community who get to watch this live and ask questions. And if you'd like to do that and you want to level up your DataViz skills in a very supportive and lovely community, you can check out elevatedataviz.com. Okay, so on to you, Will.
Great. And I'm actually going to pass it to Duncan, who I think has a brief announcement.
Yes, good idea.
Right?
Amateur hour continues.
A little bit of news before we get into our topic, and then we will finally launch.
It's all right. Yes. So if you've been following this show for a little while, then you might remember that we did an episode a while back. I think it was maybe like 18 months ago or something.
Yeah, a while. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On awards programs and where like the value that they bring to the community, or like, do they bring value? That was the kind of question we were trying to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And around that time, I started working on a project around doing an awards program for data sonification, which is the process of turning data into sound and music. It's a bit like data visualization, but instead of making visuals, you make sounds instead. If that sounds weird to you, then Google data sonification and you'll find lots of examples. But if it doesn't sound weird to you and you would like to see some of the state of the art of what people are making in data sonification today, I'm really happy to announce that the Data Sonification Awards 2025 have just released its winners for this year. So nice. I'm going to put a link in the chat there, which I can then put up on the screen. awards2025.sonificationawards.org. If you go there, you will find all of the winners, and the winners are the ones that are kind of marked with a little purple triangle. They say award on them, so it should be pretty easy to figure out which they are. And yeah, have a look through, check some of them out. You can filter them down by all kinds of things like the subject matter, the goal, whether it's art or data journalism or public engagement or accessibility or something, different types of sonification. Highly recommend going and checking some of those out.
Was there, I'm just curious, is there something that was in particular that you found among the winners that kind of like pushed them over the edge into the winner circle?
So what we did is slightly different to a traditional awards program like the Information is Beautiful Awards, for example, where there's like one winner in every category. What we did instead is we set a bunch of criteria, and the ones that met that criteria were awarded. So it's less like the IIB Awards or the Oscars or something like that. And it's much more like a kind of Michelin star. It's a badge that says, this is a really great sonification.
That's great. Yeah, because you suggested that in our Elevate DataViz show when we were talking about that. And you implemented it. Wow, full circle.
And I made it happen. And so we had different categories for, we had different criteria for art projects, for communication projects, and for what we called analysis projects, which includes kind of like research and technical applications and things like that. The equivalent of sort of dashboards for sonification. And yeah, I was really, really impressed by A, the number of entries that we had, and B, the standard of the sonifications that were submitted. We were able to award more than half of the entrants, which I thought was really good sign that of the health of the ecosystem around sonification. We're really happy about that. Yeah. So yeah, now the results are out, and we are going to get together our expert committees and look at the criteria again for next year. And then towards the end of this year, we will be opening up submissions again for the awards next year. So yeah,
Great.
if you want to find out more about that, you can go to sonificationawards.org, or yeah, if you want to check out the winners, awards2025.sonificationawards.org.
Excellent. That's great.
Announcement over.
Now back to you, Will.
Back to you, Will, in the studio.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so I think I'll give a quick overview of sort of like the background of what we're talking about. And then just to be clear, what we'll talk about is sort of like our take on the broader issues maybe that are raised by these articles, but not necessarily like a specific response, like point by point response to the articles themselves. So Ali has very helpfully put on the screen here this article that Shirley wrote, Shirley Wu, recently, information designer, wrote an article called "What Killed Innovation?" And I think I'm actually just going to read out loud like the first two paragraphs, because that kind of sums up the thesis here. So Shirley said, I entered the field of DataViz in 2012 when D3 had just come out and interactive graphics were going through a digital renaissance. By the time I was fully steeped in the field in 2016, it felt like a new experimental project was coming out every week, each one pushing the boundaries of how we think about, visualize, and communicate data. But fast forward a decade, and it feels like I'm seeing the same polished but predictable formats over and over. So that's sort of Shirley's thesis. And then she goes on to talk about all these different takes that she got from lots of other big names in the field about the history of digital information graphics, innovative information graphics, how things have changed, concluding that sort of the field has, the creativity in our industry has plateaued, and attributing that to a few different things. One of them being sort of the rise and then takeover of scrollytelling as a format. And another, interestingly, being the pandemic, which she thinks really caused a big change, a big shift sort of in how the general public views DataViz.
Yeah, general data literacy.
Right. And it's a really, really fascinating article. I highly encourage everyone to read it. It's got lots of nuanced takes, different takes from other people that have even more background and history in the industry, that have been here for, not just the past decade, but the past 3 decades. And then the other article, which we'll talk about, was sort of a response to this. Well, actually, it says it was a direct response to Shirley's article. So Moritz Stefaner, who I think we've had Moritz as a guest speaker at Elevate one time. Didn't we do that?
We did. Yeah, internally.
Internally, yeah. So our members might remember that talk.
And if you've only just joined as a member and you don't remember that talk, you can find it in the archives.
Yes. So Moritz wrote this article called "Crisis? What Crisis?" And I thought it was kind of funny because it sounds like the title of the article would make you think it's about how everything is great and there isn't a crisis. And then the entire article proceeds to talk about how we are in a crisis. And it's more like, how can we get out of this crisis? So Moritz says, it's safe to say that 2024 was an extremely dead year for creative DataViz freelancers and small agencies. And we saw less experimental data visualization, a decline in investments in bespoke data visualization, a homogeneity in visual styles, and the few things that did do well have very different formats, he says. They're now more bite-size, small things, personalized apps or videos, rather than these sort of, large, grand, interactive web pieces. And again, his article goes into a lot of really interesting detail about, why this is happening and what changed and what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, some examples too.
Yeah, giving some examples. So I thought maybe we could just start with like a broad take from each of us. I'm particularly curious, maybe to start with Duncan, about like what is your just very top of mind reaction, since you had never heard of these articles before or never read them before?
Yeah, I mean, I saw them pop up on Elevate in our chat community where people were talking about it a bit, but I think I was busy at the time, and so I didn't read it. And then I thought, and then you said, hey, let's talk about these articles on this show. And I was like, okay, well, at least some of our listeners will not have read these articles, so maybe I won't read them either, and I can be that kind of naive voice asking like what's interesting about this. I mean, I feel like people who are in an industry love to talk about, like, get super inside baseball about like what's going on in that industry. My kind of take is that this is more, I think this might be more noise than signal that they're sort of responding to here, that this isn't necessarily a trend, a big capital T trend that needs to be dissected in think pieces, and more of a variation that is, you know, explainable by several things, including the kind of complete takeover of AI when it comes to investment in the tech sector. People are less interested in doing like data storytelling and more interested in just throwing everything at anything that has the badge AI on it. Maybe that's covered in the articles a bit. Haven't quite got to them yet, so you can tell me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Moritz does call that out actually in his article. Precisely what you said. Not that AI is like taking our jobs, but that you know,
it's
AI
taking
is
the attention of funders.
Yeah, it's sucking up all the investment that might go otherwise to, you know, a creative data.
I think he said AI is eating our lunch. I liked how he said that. AI is eating our lunch in terms of being the cool kid everybody wants to hang out with, but also replacing some need for custom tools.
But then also on a kind of personal level, I didn't really feel a downturn recently. Like, I had lunch with Valentina De Filippo recently, and she mentioned this. She was like, yeah, last year was a bit, you know, quiet for me. And I didn't experience that. And I don't know if that's because the work that I'm doing these days in terms of, I think, what they're talking about, like creative, different projects and stuff, all of that is really directed towards sonification for me these days. And the visualization work I do is more, you know, clients know what they want and I deliver what they want. And, you know, that's the situation. But yeah, I'll stop there and you can respond.
Well, no, I think that's interesting because it's a good contextualization. Like, my sort of one of my takes on this is that I think obviously what people are experiencing is a real thing, you know, definitely. I believe Shirley and Moritz when they say that business is down, and several other people have echoed that as well. But I think it's, like you said, it's really like you could take that and extrapolate it. And I think in some of these articles, it has been extrapolated to kind of be like creative data viz as a whole is really suffering. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think, again, within this very small niche of creative data viz, there are certain even smaller niches that are really suffering, and others that are thriving. So, you know, like your sonification business and, you know, the niche that you have carved out of essentially like helping mission-driven, environmental-focused nonprofits with data storytelling is doing really well right now.
It's doing great.
Yeah, and maybe the, you know, I do think I have heard as well from other people that like the sort of niche that Shirley often occupied, which was like highly interactive, bespoke, web-based data visualizations, is
for companies and commercial sort of stuff. Yeah.
Right. And that is seeing a downturn. And so I think it's interesting to see like how even at the most micro level, these things are really, really changing. And I think like there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, the articles cover a lot of those reasons. You know, there is, of course, economic uncertainty. There is just changing tastes. I think people have not as much time anymore for devoting to large scale, like really long projects. But But something that I haven't heard mentioned as much, which I think to me is like really interesting, is that you know, when people talk about sort of the heyday of these types of projects, it was like maybe 2012 to 2016 or something. And that was certainly the time that I was getting into the field. And at that time, there was like, you know, I could count on two hands the number of people that I knew of who did these projects. And so I think naturally it was, you know,
and two of them wrote the articles that we are talking about today.
So yeah, you know, there was demand and then there was a supply of people to do that work. And fast forward a decade, and thanks in a lot of part to those, you know, those people who did those projects back then, they have inspired and mentored and trained a whole new generation of people that now also have that skill set. And so I don't think necessarily there's actually been like a massive decline in the demand for these types of projects. I think what's more likely is that there's been sort of a steady stream of demand, but the supply of people doing these projects has increased a lot. And not just that there's like everybody is freelancing and there's competition among freelancers for this, but that a lot of organizations have brought these people in-house, or they've realized that they can train their own people to do this type of project. The tooling has grown to a point where, you know, you don't need always these days like a specialized DataViz engineer who knows D3 inside and out to build one of these projects. You can just get one of your web developers to do it, because there's really mature packages and ecosystems of tools that anybody that has sort of basic knowledge of development can use with a little bit of education. And those educational materials to learn how to do it exist. And so, you know, now a company can just say, well, we have a web developer and
watch these YouTube videos.
Here's a bunch of YouTube videos and blog posts that Moritz and Shirley made, and you can just go watch those and then learn how to do it yourself.
But I mean, I think that the companies that are doing that are not getting something as good as they might get if they hired somebody who was an expert in DataViz, somebody like Moritz or Shirley, to do that work.
Right.
But possibly what they're getting is something that's good enough for their purposes, and that's the crucial thing. Like, there are some clients who want the very best thing in the world, and they will pay a lot of money for that. But there are some clients who just want it to work, and work within their budget. And that is, I think, the bit of the market that you're talking about that has grown massively. Whereas the appetite for people doing things that have never been seen before on the web at great expense, that is the same tiny size that it always was.
Yeah, it makes me think about, if, you know, something creative, it needs to be new and useful. And useful could be like getting attention because it's so novel, right? But if the main purpose or the biggest value you got from something like these very custom data visualizations was that it was a novel, so you got attention, and it was less of someone's understanding of whatever topic it is, then I could see how that would give you diminishing returns as it became less and less novel. So I could see how that turns into this problem where, you know, people can sort of duplicate it a little bit themselves and get a little bit of that value, but then, you know, fewer people are going to be spending the big bucks to get the novelty that's diminishing. Right.
And also I feel like what they've been talking about is like, you know, I'm quoting from Moritz's thing. I asked around on Blue Sky for DataViz pieces that went popular, pieces that went viral, found wide adoption, opened new audiences, were shared a lot. And I think what he's talking about there is almost exclusively web stuff that exists on the web, right? Whereas I kind of feel like you mentioned COVID before, but I feel like post-pandemic, people are kind of, they're only spending as much time on the internet as they need to now that they don't need to so much. And there is so much more demand for doing things in physical spaces. And so I think when it comes to creating immersive experiences for museums and galleries and events and things like that, like often a lot of the people who come to us at Loud Numbers, they're looking for some experience along those lines, some big audiovisual thing that will speak to people in a room and get them to feel something, rather than a link that goes viral on Twitter. Do you know what I mean? It's like a very, very different ask.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And I'm trying to find, let me see if I can control find, maybe it's in Shirley's article. I think it was in Moritz's article somewhere where he actually mentioned that as well, that like the format of the web in those heydays, that was where everybody was hanging out, and it was a fun place to be. And he said, you know, in the last few years, the web is no longer a fun place to be for a lot of people.
Certainly the kind of places on the web where things go viral.
Right. Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also interesting. So like the other thing that I wanted to bring up that I thought was very interesting is this idea that like that content, people are demanding smaller and smaller content. I think in both cases there's this idea that like, well, nowadays compared to in the past, people have less time. They just want bite-sized information. Nobody wants to spend time reading a long article or a big thing or a new innovative thing. They just want stuff that they know and recognize. And can use on their phones, for example. Like the change from desktop to phones was something that was mentioned. And I'm curious to hear your takes on that, because I definitely have a take. But
as a former Axios brevity.
Yes, exactly. As someone,
I think it's gone in both directions. Like I think that's kind of true, but I think it's also gone in the direction that I was just talking about. Like about you know, sure, maybe something takes 5 minutes to experience market has disappeared, but the something takes an hour to experience market has grown, and the something takes 5 seconds to experience market has grown. It's sort of gone off in those different directions.
I agree with that, because, you know, obviously I'm drawing from my experience in life, and I just feel like I am asked to care about so many things that I just don't have time to do a 5 to 10 minute scrolly telling deep dive on every single topic. You know, like the airflow in airplanes and what's happening with COVID, what's happening with the elections. Like I can't spend that much time on all these things, just from a finite time perspective, but also from my sanity perspective. So I'm trying to pick just the couple of things that are really important to me, and those are the scrolly telling things I can deep dive. Everything else, I just need like, okay, what was the quick thing that happened? What the TLDR? Headline. What do I need to know so I can like exist in the world safely, and then move on to the next thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a sentiment a lot of people share, and like that's a very fair thing. Like, so that's my background. The reason Ali was laughing earlier about Axios. So the news equivalent of this is Axios, which, you know, famously, their articles are this sort of very distinctive, short style, very few words. It's a lot of bullet points and sort of like catchphrase sections that always denote the same thing, so that it takes you, the whole goal of that is to minimize the amount of time that you spend reading the article, essentially. Like maximize the information that you get while minimizing the time, giving you only the important points. And I came into that quite, like when I was hired at Axios, I was quite against that ethos. I was like, well, you know, I love doing long form stuff that's cool and it's art and it's whatever. And but the more time you spend with it, the more you realize it's what you want 90% of the time. And I think like, you know, I don't want to misrepresent anything that Shirley or Moritz wrote or believed. They both have acknowledged in their articles or other articles, of course, that, you know, a lot of the times the short bite-sized charts are really the best way to do things. And they both do that kind of work and of course realize the value of it. So not to misrepresent anything they're saying, but one of the comparisons we often made at Axios was like the difference between our articles and like an article in the New Yorker. where if you're reading an essay in the New Yorker, it's, you know, several thousand words, really in depth. The prose has been thought out and beautifully written and edited. And that is what you want when you're reading a super engrossing story, like a topic that's something that deserves that amount of space. But the vast majority of things don't. You know, the vast majority of things are better told in just a straight to the point format. And I think it's the same, like Ali said, with data visualization. You know, the bulk of the work, it's best told with a bar chart. And so when you go and try to innovate on top of that for the sake of innovation, it feels like, you know, people get the sense that you're wasting their time, essentially.
Yeah, because it's inefficient. It's inefficient. And you are going to strike out a lot. And if you don't really have, if your livelihood depends on it, and if the economy can't, I guess, sustain possibly getting it wrong, then it's gonna get cut, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I had this experience. So like I came into that environment where the ethos was, we will never waste your time. Like we need to make sure if we're ever going to do something long, or if we're ever going to do something innovative or different, it has to be worth your time. And so when we were making my job was to make essentially long form storytelling, like scrollytelling, web-based DataViz for this company that had this very different ethos. And I think it actually led to something like better in the end, because we had tons of stories that we wanted to make where we cut them because we said, this is not worth doing a long, in-depth thing on. It really doesn't need that treatment.
Because you can get the same value through something shorter.
Yeah, exactly. You could get the same value through something shorter. And so what we found was that, like, I was reading the response to the LinkedIn post here, and someone had commented that they saw this in news where people only spend like 1 minute with their scrollytelling articles, and so clearly they're not getting the value out of it. We actually saw the opposite. So our scrollytelling articles at Axios, we saw people spending 5 minutes, 10 minutes with them often. So even though they were not usually going viral, our stories didn't have tons of page views, but the people that were looking at them were spending a lot of time with them.
They were self-selecting, like, I do want to go on a deep dive. This is interesting to me. And you guys kind of pre-selected things to be super interesting. It's not like we're just doing scrollytelling for everything. It was like, no, this needs it. So the people who were really interested in it spent time reading it.
Yeah. So that was the lesson I took away from it, was that, you know, if it is worth people spending time with, they will spend time with it.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times, like, I had posted this in the Slack privately, and, you know, this is more speaking about myself than anyone else. Like, a lot of times when I was starting out in this field, the work that I did, I think, was totally self-indulgent. And that's fine. I love that kind of work, right? Like, that's very important. And when I say self-indulgent, I mean, you're choosing to make something innovative and long and in-depth, not because you think it deserves that, or not because, like, that topic is really that important that it warrants that treatment, but that you just have an interest in, you know, basically creating art, making something really cool and innovative and interesting for your own desires. And I think, like, that work is super important, because that is how we innovate. You know, you have to choose something where you are the driver of, you know, I'm going to do something new just because I want to. And that's where a lot of innovation comes from. But at the same time, like, recognizing the fact that sometimes this type of work is a little bit self-indulgent, then it makes total sense why, you know, there's maybe a decline in it, or people aren't spending as much time with it as they used to.
It's interesting, this kind of like concept of self-indulgence that you're talking about. Like, I'm kind of reacting against it a little bit, because I think partly because quite a lot of what I do is quite self-indulgent, but I think also because it's a different kind of value, right? It's maybe a value to yourself, maybe more than it is to and like the kind of audience that we're talking about, people who
Right.
are extremely time pressed and in a hurry or whatever.
Mhm.
Like something that's self-indulgent to one person will be fascinating and really valuable to another one. So I think,
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
yeah,
And that's what I meant, I guess, is that when I say self-indulgent and I said, I love these projects, I think they're important, is because they serve a totally different purpose. The purpose they serve is they
exactly.
are art. And
Yeah.
so they serve innovation, they
Or their
serve,
research in
yeah,
some
they
way.
serve, right, creativity and people within the field, their inspiration. Most of these projects that I would describe as self-indulgent are the reason I'm in the field today, because they inspired me to do that. And so,
Yeah.
you know, within the field, within the other people that are super interested in that, the guy that is so obsessed with hurricane names that he wants to read the, 10-minute thing I wrote about it, that person, it's wonderful for. But it's not surprising to me that there's less commercial interest in those projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of comes to a point that I think I've sort of made in different ways over a few of these shows, which is about the role of personal projects in your portfolio. I think possibly people who are just getting into DataViz freelancing, maybe the model in their head is something like, right, well, I'll do a couple of personal projects to get some cool stuff to put in my portfolio, and then I'll just do commercial stuff from then on out. But actually, I'm still doing personal projects despite having been working in this industry for almost 10 years now. And the reason is because that's where my R&D is.
Yeah.
Like that's where I kind of figure out what is going to be cool to try to pitch to or sell to a potential customer in the future. Like, and then I can show them an example of here's how it works. And I think this works really well, blah, blah, blah. Whereas if I kind of pitch them a completely untested idea and it doesn't work out, that's a very awkward situation to get yourself into. You have to have very, very tolerant and patient clients if you're going to try and do things that way. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Some people would call this stuff self-indulgent, but to me, it has a huge value in terms of some of the things that you're talking about. Like, this is the reason why people get into the industry and everything, but also in terms of like future commercial value. Because if you're not trying cool stuff, you've got no pipeline of inspiration for the next, set of clients that come along who do want something that is different and unique and interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of, I know Gabby couldn't join us today, but she has talked a lot about this in the past about how, she does amazingly creative data visualizations and interactive things, but she has been also taking her business in a direction where she's doing more data visualization style guides, design systems, and I think Moritz even mentions design systems in his article. And it just makes me think about how, Gabby is such a creative person, how she is pivoting into making sure she's providing as much value to the people who are paying as she can, no matter how that turns out. That could be in some beautiful visual form, some visual metaphor that no one's ever seen before, or it could be in a design system that brings tons of value in a slightly different way. So we might need to think about experimenting, being innovative in things other than visual forms.
I mean, this is something that you talk a lot about in your book, right, Ali? Chartspark, the one that's like there,
tiny in the corner.
It's a very good book, people. But Ali kind of talks in that about, and correct me if I'm mangling this, Ali, about how there's lots of different forms of creativity. When you think of creativity, you think about an artist who is like splashing paint on a canvas or something like that. But coming up with a really efficient and effective way of managing projects, that's creativity as well.
Yeah, if it's new and it brings value to you, it's useful in some way, it's creative. So, maybe we're thinking about innovation in a very narrow context here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I think defining innovation as data visualizations that go viral on social
on the
media
web, goes viral on the web. Yeah, that's just like one iteration.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of like when I think of how we did things at, like, when I was doing data storytelling, it was sometimes we were experimenting with visual form, but more often than not, the thing that we're trying to accomplish is storytelling. And so, it might be that we do make a big scrolly telling article that has many charts and stuff, but they're basically all just bar charts and line charts. There's not a huge innovation in the visual forms. And it reminds me of something that one of my favorite authors talks about, different styles of prose in writing for fiction. And he talks about the difference between like very literary prose, very flowery, like innovating and using new verbal forms and interesting tenses and sentence structures and like language that makes you think, which is wonderful if you love poetry and want to read beautiful prose. But he says that he specifically steers clear of this and goes for what he calls window pane prose, which is essentially like very clear, to the point writing that tells you exactly what's happening and doesn't distract from the story. And the purpose of it is so that you can focus all of your attention on the plot and the story and what's happening, rather than the sort of the medium that it's coming to you through. Yep. And so I think there's a lot to be said for doing that.
Who's the author, Will?
Brandon Sanderson.
Brandon Sanderson. Thank you.
He writes gigantic fantasy books.
Cool.
Yeah. So puppy killers, he calls them, because they're so big. If you drop it,
Wow.
That's awful.
That's some window pane writing right there.
Yeah, it was a good metaphor.
That's correct.
So you could think about innovation in storytelling format where there's no innovation in the visual form, the technology behind it, or anything like that.
Or it could be an innovation in terms of like how you source the data, or like how you combine two data sets together, or how you collect the data, how you put together the database that powers the website. Like there's a ton of ways in which you can be innovative and creative in your work that doesn't necessarily involve scrolly telling or other formats. Like making something different, visually different.
And I wonder if part of the frustration from the articles is just that this new technology, that allowed us to make these things on the web is so cool, but it maybe to some people didn't feel like enough time there wasn't enough time, or people didn't spend enough time appreciating it before like something new came along and was like overshadowed it. Maybe some pining for that. I mean, it seems like technology is just getting better and better so fast. I think of like an artist learning how to oil paint, and just the technology around oil paintings, and then how that was whatever you had lasted for a really long time, hundreds of years, and then now with digital tools, creating something that looks like it was an oil painting, but then you're able to like add all sorts of things, and now AI, it's just it's happening really fast. It does seem like it's maybe some people feel like we weren't done innovating with this particular iteration of tools before it got overshadowed.
I mean, maybe this is the point where we should bring in the cliche of the Gartner hype cycle graphic. Are you both familiar with that? Yeah. For anyone who isn't, this is a kind of graph that sort of starts out over here with the trigger for innovation, and then it goes up. There's like expectations on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And it goes up to the peak of inflated expectations, down into the trough of disillusionment, up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity. And it's all, very exciting. But I think what we're hearing is maybe just that DataViz is currently in the trough of disillusionment. Yeah, there you go. The trough of disillusionment. And people just aren't that excited about it, but it is still delivering what it needs to. It's just that no one's that jazzed anymore.
Well, this sounds a lot like what people in both of the articles, I think they called this out. And actually in Shirley's article, she had a section where she quoted Georgia Lupi, who said, Georgia said, "We're just experiencing the natural ebb and flow of an innovation cycle. And she said, I think every wave of technological or methodological follows a predictable pattern, an initial hype cycle, a period of widespread adoption, and then an eventual plateau. So
there we go. Yeah. And I do feel like maybe this is a good time to pivot into where we think, what's happening after this plateau of productivity. There's going to be another technology trigger, right? And gets peak of inflated expectations. I mean, we can't predict where technology is going, but I feel like if we are looking to stay relevant with our skills and pivot our skills as needed, I always like to go back and think about the things that are always going to be true. And I think, Duncan, you had mentioned this, this is a timely article, but what's timeless about this conversation? What are we always going to be concerned about as humans, no matter what technology trigger happens around the corner,
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think, people are always going to, from this point onward, people are always going to have loads of data, probably more than they can handle. They're always going to want to tell interesting stories, and they always want to get people to feel things.
Yeah. And I think feeling connection with other people as well. And I think that's something that's really big in your sonification work, feeling something, but then also being connected to a subject or other people through another medium. And also the kind of interactive experiences that you have where people can participate in the data in some kind of a way that makes you feel connected.
Doing things in rooms. Like, rooms are great.
Turns
out there's loads of people in rooms, people.
You should trademark that. Doing things in room, trademarked by Duncan Gear.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Duncan, because when you talked about like the in-person stuff and physical things and rooms, what's funny is that like Shirley has pivoted to the point where I think like half of Shirley's time is now spent just making physical installation, like data installation artwork, like the type of thing that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I wonder if she's gone through the same thought process of.
I mean, quite honestly, I think it is easier to get 10 people into a room for 20 minutes to check something out than it is to get 10 people to click a link on social media these days.
And spend time there.
Honestly.
Well, to Ali's point, that it's so, you are bombarded with so many things these days that you really do have to pick and choose. I mean, we're all tuning out something right now.
So many things.
That's for our own survival as much as just anything else. I mean,
we're 40 minutes into this thing, so at this point, anyone who wants the quick hits has long departed. So if you're still listening to this, you're the real deal. We love you.
The real deal. Well, I mean, and that shows you too, like the reasons that I listen to podcasts, I'll listen to an hour of people talking about things, especially multiple people, is because I like to feel the connection. Like I'm part of a conversation. It's not only the TLDR, point that I got from it, but I got to feel like I was chatting with like-minded people.
Yeah.
Right. Well, one of the interesting things I think that sort of segues to this point that I was kind of surprised to read in both articles was the importance they placed on the pandemic and how much that the perceived influence of the pandemic on the general public's knowledge or awareness or perception of DataViz. And Shirley said something in her article like, the DataViz became so visible during the pandemic, and she expected that this would come out and really increase the demand. Like after the pandemic, everybody would realize the value of DataViz, and there would be a huge boom for it. And that instead, what happened is, yes, the awareness increased, but everyone just wanted more line charts and bar charts. Like there was a big demand increase for simple things, and the data literacy for simple things increased.
That was useful to them. That part of DataViz was useful to them, not the novel part. That's my instinct is that, this is cool. Like I can visualize my data and see patterns and outliers and insights that I couldn't see before, but I don't need to pay thousands of dollars to a professional to create some new out of the box thing. I can just use these tools that are on the off the shelf type things like Tableau, Power BI.
Yeah.
flourish.
Well, and I'm curious. So both of you do feel that there was a like noticeable shift after the pandemic in the broader awareness, maybe, or buzz around DataViz. Is that true?
I don't know if I would put it that strongly.
Because the reason I said I was surprised to read this is because I didn't necessarily feel that. I think there's been a lot of talk, especially in the community, about like how, you know, COVID was such a moment for DataViz because now these charts were in front of people and they were seeing them, and these things like flatten the curve and the, you know, some of the viral stuff that the Washington Post made and the New York Times made.
It does feel like there was a time where people who were staring at charts a lot more than they normally would be. Like I remember like that line chart showing, you know, new cases per day, you know, just in my local area. I was looking at that a lot, and people who I know don't look at data at all were looking at that a lot too.
Did you want to be looking at that?
No, I was seeing like, is it okay for me to go to the grocery store?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I kind of feel like some of this idea that now everybody is like super trained up in DataViz, and so we're going to get loads of work. That's absolutely going to be wishful thinking at the time. And
it's like I needed a hammer for this project because I needed to nail some things, but now I don't need the project's over. I don't need a hammer anymore.
Right, exactly. I've nailed the things in. So, you know, sure, now I know how to swing a hammer, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be swinging my hammer at everything all the time, you know?
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, people aren't as nerdy about it as we are, I guess, and just like love it. Maybe some people fell in love, but
I'm sure there was an effect. Like I'm sure I'm not so naive to think like there was no effect of the pandemic. I do think it is true. Yes, more people saw charts, and I'm sure there were some people where that really did increase their awareness of DataViz, or maybe, you know, they just became more accustomed to the idea of even like, what is a dashboard? Like I think maybe the language more than anything was helpful. Like people know what the word dashboard means now.
Data storytelling too.
Yeah.
Outside of the context of a car, of course.
Right. Outside of the, you know, dashboard,
the dashboard.
A display of data that updates that tells you something. Is now like a more generally known term. But
and if you think about it in terms of jobs too, I was looking for data visualization designer jobs back in 2018. And they were few and far between. You know, you kind of had to read between the lines. It sort of was like a data analyst type job. And then you would look and just read, you know, in the description, it would talk about you need to be able to make charts. But now I searched just the other day, and there's tons of things that say data visualization specialist or data visualization designer, data visualization engineer. There's a lot of jobs out there. So I mean,
visualization artist in some cases.
I mean, and that
the other day from a supermarket chain in the UK. In the Elevate community, we have a channel called Opportunities where people post interesting jobs that they've seen. And someone posted up a job from a supermarket chain called Marks and Spencer's in the UK, which, if you're not British, it's a kind of you know, your dad buys his trousers there kind of sort of place.
You almost made Wilson out of water.
And they also have like they have like a food hall, which is like a bit fancy and things like that. Anyway, they advertise for a data artist, and I was like, wow, okay.
Strange. I know. I mean, and that was pre and post COVID. So I mean, that was my perspective pre and post COVID. But I'm sure there's other factors other than COVID too. Just the
and that was kind of my perception, that COVID was maybe a contributor in certain small ways of increasing the awareness of terminology and stuff like that, but that it was really more like a small pebble maybe in the like avalanche of other stuff that was already happening that was pushing this trend of and so that's maybe a good time to talk about like the future, like you said, Ali, because both of these articles acknowledge like what's happening is a natural cycle of, you know, a new field. And we have, we did the innovation thing, and now we're sort of plateauing and things are becoming more common. And that's definitely my perception, is that like, while there might be less demand or less interest in this, you know, highly innovative, pushing the bounds, bespoke, custom stuff, in certain niches, that there's way more demand for like respected DataViz, respected DataViz positions within other teams. You know, you'll see design teams in big companies now where they have a data visualization product designer on staff. You never would have seen that 5 or 10 years ago. It was very rare. Yeah.
It also makes me think about the skills that, you know, like if you're thinking about, okay, what skills, technologies do I need to be learning? Since the technology is changing, and it does seem like with things like AI, it's going to become easier and easier to be handling massive amounts of data and visualizing in different charts and novel things very quickly.
And vibe coding up your dashboard. And,
yes, vibe coding, yes. It does seem like, you know, that's the direction we're going, and that kind of skill is going to become easier. What other skills should you be thinking about honing? You know, Gabby's doing like design systems and style guides and storytelling, and also things like stakeholder interactions. Like Bill Shander has a new book coming out called Stakeholder Whispering. I think it's coming out next month. Yes, April 29th, 2025 by Bill Shander. And I love this topic because that is a huge skill that's very, I think, undervalued in our line of work. Being able to talk to someone who has a problem and seeing how data visualization or not data visualization can help solve their problem, and what level of creativity maybe you need to solve this problem. You know? That's a skill for sure.
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely, like you said, it's combining all of these things into helping people solve problems. So you know, DataViz is a very useful tool for communication and helping people solve problems, but that's sort of it's often like the end thing that you do. And there's, you know, an entire chain of things that come before that of, you know, identifying the problem and finding out who the people are who are relevant to that, and gathering information, managing a team of people that are brainstorming and building stuff, and all of those skills of, you know, problem identification, team management, storytelling, and then, you know,
user research, like all of that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot of opportunities have come my way because I just sort of through random chance started developing these skills of, you know, project management, and really like zooming out a little bit and working more on the problem identification, and then the solution-driven work from there.
Back to those things that will always be true about the human experience, is that we want to minimize uncertainty. So being able to help someone figure that out and sort through the things they're uncertain about, or the things they don't know that they don't know, that's a pretty useful skill.
Yeah. Well, to the point that you made earlier about like creativity being, maybe it's coming up with a really innovative database or something. And we've often said that, like, I think all of us probably, when we sell ourselves to people, we don't necessarily say, like, if you're selling yourself to a company, you don't necessarily say, like,
I'm really good at coming up with innovative databases.
Yeah, I'm great. Well, you don't tell people like, I'm great at, you know, making charts, or like, you know, designing really great graphics. You say like, I'm good at helping you understand your data. Like I can help you make decisions and, you know, convince people of things with your data.
Yeah, connecting the dots for them rather than just being like, I know how to use Tableau. Well, how is Tableau solving my problem? Like, I don't really know enough about the field and the tool and whatever to know that. Maybe that you do, but a lot of times you don't. So if you can connect the dots for them, then it's setting yourself up to be more useful.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that point because it's such an important thing, I think, for people who are getting into DataViz and maybe freelancing in general to learn. And we've buried it right at the end of this hour-long episode. But it's so important.
Listen to the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
You must listen to the end. That's our best nuggets is at the end.
It's so important because a lot of people do put up portfolios where they're like, I do Tableau, or, you know, I know how to code D3. But actually, what you need to be doing is figuring out what your clients' wants and needs are in ways that they might even not be able to articulate themselves.
Yeah, it's hard.
And saying that that's what you do.
Yes.
And it
is
just so
hard.
happens that you use Tableau to do that as a tool.
Yeah. And who cares about the tool? A lot of times they don't care, right?
Right.
But they just want the end result. They don't care how long it takes you. They probably care how much it costs, but they don't care how long it takes. They don't care what tool you use. Usually you just have to connect the value. And it is really hard to figure that out. So we're not saying it's easy, but that is where, you know, that's where you'll get paid because you're bringing value.
That's where you'll be able to put your rates up and stop, you know, taking jobs on Fiverr and platforms like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, again, one of the tools in your tool belt there, if you're solving problems for people, you can say, I can come up with great, innovative, you know, boundary pushing solutions that no one has ever thought of before. And that is a value proposition, because if you've used that to help someone solve a real problem, then, you know, that is a way to sell yourself. But I think it's clear that like the evolution of things, that's probably no longer enough in a lot of cases.
I think I'd agree with that. And thanks to Shirley Wu and Moritz Stefaner for writing these articles and bringing up these really interesting points, because it got us talking about it and exploring more about our field and the future of our field, which is always so interesting. And I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you for everyone for joining us.
Thank you to the Elevate community members who also contributed their thoughts in our discussion.
And I hope we can continue the discussion too. Maybe this got you thinking about something else.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Ali said, that Shirley and Moritz, both of them have sparked probably more discussion in the field than I've seen in maybe a couple years about a single topic. So yeah, it really felt like it injected some interesting energy and really great discussion. There's also discussion over on LinkedIn. Shirley made a post about her article over there if you want to chime in. And also stay tuned. So Shirley's article came from her newsletter. And so you can subscribe to her newsletter on Button Down. I'm trying to find a link somewhere for it, but we'll definitely.
I just dropped a link to the LinkedIn article if people.
Okay, great. So it should be there. So, so go check it out. Subscribe to Shirley's newsletter. This was part 2. This article was part 2 in a 3-part series that Shirley is writing about the state of the field. So the part 3 is still unpublished. So stay tuned for even more thoughts on this in the future.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay,
There's
thanks.
The button down email address.
Oh yeah, thanks. Oh, thank you. Okay. buttondown.com/shirleywu.studio. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you have any follow-up questions, join our Elevate DataViz learning community at elevatedataviz.com. Bye. Bye everyone.
Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.